Good afternoon, everyone. Well, not quite. My name is Helen Kyung-Yun, and I'm honored to serve as your moderator today. I currently serve as the assistant principal at Claire Lilienthal K-8 School in San Francisco Unified School District, and I've dedicated more than 15 years to public education as a teacher, instructional leader, and school administrator. Throughout my career, I've been really passionate about creating equitable and inclusive learning environments where all students can thrive and where history, identity, and diverse perspectives are recognized as essential parts of education. As a Korean American educator, this work is also deeply meaningful to me personally. I believe that teaching difficult histories with honesty, empathy, and care not only honors those whose stories have too often been overlooked, and also helps prepare the next generation to become thoughtful, informed, and compassionate citizens. I also serve as the newly appointed Teacher Committee Chair to the Education for Social Justice Foundation. I always get this right. Where I have the privilege of supporting efforts to expand human rights education and help educators bring difficult histories into classrooms with care, accuracy, and integrity. I'm also currently pursuing my doctorate of education at the University of San Francisco, where my research currently focuses on educational leadership and equity. It is truly an honor to be a part of this important conversation with all of you today, and I look forward to learning alongside you over the course of the symposium. All right, so I'll move into the opening remarks. Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for today's symposium, Memory Against Denial, Steps Towards Historical Truth and Justice. This morning's session explores both the historical reality of the Japanese military sexual slavery system and the continuing pursuit of justice through scholarship, legal advocacy, and historical memory. We are honored to hear from distinguished scholars and advocates whose work reminds us that preserving historical truth is essential to protecting human rights today. Our first speaker is Sung Sun, co-founder and executive director of the Education for Social Justice Foundation, a San Francisco-based nonprofit dedicated to advancing human rights through education, advocacy, and international engagement. A former bilingual educator with the San Francisco Unified School District, Ms. Sun pioneered Northern California's first public school Korean English two-way immersion program in 1994. Today, she represents ESJF as an NGO in special consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council and serves as Director of Feminist Foreign Policy for the U.S. Women's Caucus. She is the author of numerous educational resources on the history of Japanese military sexual slavery system, including teacher and student guides used throughout SFUSD, as well as her recent book, The Korean Independence Movement in San Francisco and Its Legacy. Please join me in welcoming Sung Sun.
Thank you, Helen, for your kind introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Sung Sun, and let me see if I can learn how to navigate this. Oh, okay. So, as Helen mentioned, I'm a former bilingual teacher, and it's my honor to work as an executive director at the Education for Social Justice Foundation. And I just want to say that my background is in education and Korean American history, and much of my work focuses on bringing sidelined histories to the forefront of human rights education and advocacy. So Helen did a wonderful introduction. So only thing I would like to add to her description of our NGO is that our mission is to provide education on past injustices that have been relegated to the sidelines of history. Our two pillars are education and advocacy. And our focus areas include countering sexual and gender-based violence, preserving the history of and issues surrounding Korean American communities, and highlighting the grassroots movements that have shaped history. And when addressing sexual and gender-based violence, we draw on the lessons learned from the history of conflict-related sexual violence, particularly the Japanese military sexual slavery system. We also build on the lessons from the progress made by transnational women's human rights movement led by survivors of conflict-related and other forms of sexual violence. So for today's discussion, it focuses on a brief historical overview of the state-sanctioned comfort woman system, or I would prefer referring it to Japanese military sexual slavery system, and examine the different stances of the UN and the United States on this system. And I'll use the 2015 Comfort Women Agreement as a reference point in doing that. And this presentation will also highlight two successful lawsuits in South Korea that affirm the principle that human rights take precedence over state immunity and geopolitical interests. So in my presentation, I will integrate resources from my book, Comfort Woman History and Issues, Teacher Resource Guide, indicated as CWHI. Copies of this student resource guide, teacher resource guide, were distributed to 18 high schools in the San Francisco Unified School District in 2018, and the student edition was published in the same year. And these editions are part of the Government Archive collection at the Research Institute on Japanese Military Sexual Slavery in Seoul, South Korea. And in September 2021, St. Mary's College in California was the first college to adopt the student edition as a required course book. As a quick terminology note, while the term comfort woman has remained in common use for decades, this presentation also uses Japanese military sex slaves to describe the system of exploitation and dehumanization sanctioned and operated by the Japanese Imperial Armed Forces. I place comfort woman in quotation marks to indicate its use as a euphemism. I'm going to check my notes just to make sure that I don't miss anything. So during the 1930s and 1940s, among the Japanese soldiers, comfort women were considered gifts from the Japanese emperor. In his wartime diary, From Shanghai to Shanghai, Aso Tetsuo, the first Japanese medical officer who regularly examined the comfort woman for sexually transmitted diseases, wrote in his library that he noticed that these women and girls were listed as part of military supplies. And in his papers submitted to the Japanese Army Medical Department in 1939, he recommended that comfort stations should not be considered amusement facilities, but similar to hygienic shared toilets. Here are more basic facts about comfort women who were forced into state-sanctioned wartime sexual slavery by the Japanese Imperial Armed Forces from the 1930s until the end of World War II. They were deprived of their freedom to choose their residence, to move freely, to refuse sexual intercourse, and to quit. In addition, they were regularly injected with arsenic number 606, regardless of infection status, and some women and girls died from it. This photo, taken by Moriyasu Murase, a Japanese soldier who tried to hold the Japanese military accountable for its war crimes, shows Japanese soldiers lined up in front of a comfort station. Unlike Kasu Tetsuo Moriyasu Miwase, who was stationed in China during the Second Sino-Japanese War, denounced Japanese military atrocities by documenting the horrors he witnessed through photography in his book, My China Front. Hundreds of thousands of women and girls were enslaved in numerous comfort stations in Asia, denoted by the red dots on this map. Using the dark orange line, this map also illustrates the extent of Japan's military expansion before and during World War II. The first known comfort station, Daiichi Salon, was established in Shanghai in 1932, following the Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931 and 1932 Shanghai incident. And after the Second Sino-Japanese War broke out in 1937, the number of comfort stations multiplied. And the top photo here shows a type of comfort station. Here, you can see different comfort stations from the photos displayed at the Chinese Comfort Woman History Museum at Shanghai Normal University. On the day the museum opened, the first Comfort Woman Memorial in Shanghai was installed right across from the museum. I attended the museum opening and the memorial unveiling on October 22nd, 2016. Before entering comfort stations, Japanese soldiers were instructed to wear condoms wrapped in a cover. Oops, I think this one needs to go down a little bit. I don't think I can. Well, you can read the word violence, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So they were instructed to wear condoms wrapped in a cover with a writing that says Tochikeki Ichiban. This Japanese phrase can be translated as attack champion. This particular phrase indicates how imperialism was reinforced here through the false image of women as objects to be conquered or as war prizes. This phrase denies women's human rights and dignity. So after World War II, many women and girls were either mass murdered or abandoned. And we'll now pause briefly before viewing the following slides in silence. Although World War II ended in 1945, these women remained victims of imperialism, injustice, and discrimination. Some survivors of the comfort woman system chose not to return home because of the fear of stigma associated with sexual violence and the very real possibility of secondary victimization, which includes victim blaming and social ostracism. For those who did return home, felt lost and ashamed. In both cases, survivors experienced further marginalization with few safe spaces where their trauma could be acknowledged and heard. Their silence lasted for 50 years. After the Korean War, which caused an estimated 60,000 to 200,000 deaths, South Korea remained under military dictatorship. In 1987, amid an ongoing grassroots democracy movement, South Korea adopted a new democratic constitution that enabled direct presidential elections and established the protections for fundamental civil rights. In South Korea, undergoing democratization, where a growing civic movement created safe space for survivors' voices, in 1991, Hak-sung Kim became the first survivor of the Japanese military sexual slavery system to break her silence in public. Following her public testimony, hundreds of survivors in South and North Korea spoke out. And the survivors from other countries also broke their half-century-long silence. Since then, the UN has looked into this history. In 1992, Ejiro Tosca, an international human rights lawyer from Japan, proposed to the UN Commission on Human Rights the use of the term sex slaves instead of comfort women. 4 years later, UN Special Rapporteur Radhika Kumaraswamy wrote in a report to the UN that these women were forced to live with the military under constant military control and that they were deprived of their freedom and had to endure misery. In 1998, UN Special Rapporteur Gay McDougall described this system as a crime against humanity in her report to UN. Have you heard about the term crimes against humanity? Okay, great. So I know that you have some knowledge about crimes against humanity, but let's briefly look at the definitions of crimes against humanity, under which the Japanese military sexual slavery system has been classified in international legal frameworks. The 1998 Rome Statute defined crimes against humanity under its Article 7. And as you can see on this slide, the Japanese military sexual slavery system falls under several of these categories, especially category G. Next, I'll compare the contrasting stances of the UN and the US on the Japanese military sexual slavery system using the 2015 Comfort Women Agreement between South Korea and Japan. In 2012, the United States appeared to align with the UN in defining the Comfort Women system as military sexual slavery. But 3 years later, the US supported the 2015 Comfort Women Agreement, which was negotiated without survivors' participation and consent. This US decision clearly placed the geopolitical interests above women's human rights. In 2021, the US Department of State announced its 2015 stance. So basically back in 2021, the US Department of State announced and made it official that its 2015 stance remained unchanged. And beginning with the landmark UN Security Council Resolution 1325, the first Women, Peace and Security WPS resolution was adopted in 2000. Since then, the WPS agenda has developed into a vital global accountability mechanism designed to protect women and girls in conflict zones while promoting peace and security. During the 2019 Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict Week in Seoul, former UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Rashida Manju, noted that the US was among the UN member states that raised objections to language in UN Security Council. WPS Resolution 2467. The contested provisions addressed accountability and a survivor-centered approach to causes and effects of sexual violence, as well as sexual and reproductive health and rights. Regarding the 2015 Comfort Women Agreement, the UN concluded that it failed to provide adequate redress and reparations for survivors and recommended revising it by adopting victim-centered approach. And this approach is central to the WPS agenda. Guided by, I think I want to, actually I didn't realize that I added this slide at the last minute. So between 2000 and 2019, 10 WPS agenda were adopted, and they can be grouped into two categories. So the first group focuses on women's participation in peacemaking and peace building, while the second group focuses on preventing and addressing conflict-related sexual violence. Guided by these UN principles and framework, survivors of the Japanese military sexual slavery system secured 2 significant legal victories in South Korea. In a landmark ruling in January 2021, the South Korean court held that sovereign immunity does not extend to crimes against humanity. It found the Japanese government responsible for its state-sanctioned system of military sexual slavery before and during World War II, and ordered it to pay 100 million Korean won in damages to each plaintiff. The ruling became final later that month after Japan declined to appeal. While the second lawsuit was initially dismissed on immunity grounds in April 2021, the 20 plaintiffs secured a historic appellate victory in November 2023. By reversing the lower court's decision, the court prioritized the victim's right to seek justice and affirmed that customary international law is evolving to deny sovereign immunity for grave human rights violations such as crimes against humanity. This decade-long legal struggle reached its conclusion on December 9, 2023. So their legal victories mark a critical, long-awaited recognition of their rights and open a path towards justice for other victims of grave human rights violations, both past and present. Every survivor of Japan's military sexual slavery I met and who gave me permission to share their photos has told me that they do not want the crimes they suffered to be repeated. They have also made it very clear that their fight is against the Japanese government, not the Japanese people. In fact, immediately following the 2011 Fukushima earthquake in Japan, survivors Bokdong Kim and Won Gil initiated a donation campaign in South Korea to support relief efforts for earthquake victims. Some of you may have met Kim Bokdong 할머니. She visited Glendale twice. First in 2012 for the proclamation of Glendale's Memorial Day for Comfort Women, and again in 2013 for the unveiling ceremony of Glendale's Comfort Woman Memorial. In May 2015, she was named one of the world's 100 heroes for press freedom by Reporters Without Borders and Agents France Presse. As a human rights activist and peace advocate, Bokdong Kim spearheaded a transnational movement for women's human rights, justice, and peace. And several weeks before her passing, she asked me to keep fighting for her. And I believe she meant to ask this of all of us. With that, I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Ms. Son has helped us understand why historical truth matters, not only morally, but legally and educationally. Our next speaker will continue that conversation by examining how different communities have pursued justice through the legal system. Thank you, Sung, for grounding us in the historical record and reminding us that justice requires not only acknowledging the past, but confronting how history is remembered or denied. Our next speaker brings another important perspective to today's conversation. Anahid Oshagin is an attorney, social justice activist, descendant of Armenian genocide survivors, and co-creator of Reflect Space Gallery in Glendale, California. Through both her legal work and community advocacy, she explores how law, memory, and public institutions shape our understanding of historical justice. Today she will present Comparative Justice, Armenian and Korean Legal Challenges and Successes in America. Please join me in welcoming Anahit Oshagin.